Many thanks to, I was going to say, Global Ethical Finance Initiative, or GEFI, as we were told to say for the rest of the morning, for the invitation to address you at the outset of this Faith and SDGs Summit, when I was asked to talk about the role of faith groups in promoting climate justice as the country rebuilds and how faith-based finance can help to advance a net zero economy. I was thinking about this, it came to mind that when I was recently moving house in Orkney into a smaller house, and one which is far more environmentally sustainable than an old 19th century old Church of Scotland manse. I'm a great hoarder. We had 38 years of things to sort out. And what I did find were my original savings bank books from Annan's Savings Bank, which shows that my parents started an account for me when I was probably just weeks, if not days old. Now, you may think, well, what's the significance of that? Other than Annan, along with Airdrie, were the only two savings banks in Scotland that didn't actually go into the Trustees Savings Bank. But probably more significant was that Annan Savings Bank received the accounts of Ruthwell Savings Bank when it closed. And those of historians, financial historians among you, will know that the Ruthwell Bank was founded as a parish bank in 1810 by the Reverend Henry Duncan, a man of faith who wanted to encourage what he called the industrious poor to save for times of hardship. It was run by voluntary trustees, and from that very small acorn grew the worldwide savings bank movement. A shining example, perhaps, of the impact on financial services started as an act of faith to assist poor people. But times change, and it's worth remembering that the potential of a simple faith-based initiative, if we feel daunted by the challenge before us today, that nevertheless consider how that faith-based initiative did actually manage to develop, and how we should consider how faith-based financial initiatives might help advance net zero economy. I want to start by thinking of just what is the importance of the faith dimension in this time where we are discussing the COP. I believe that the whole issue of climate change and the issues at stake in the negotiations currently going on in this city ought to have a faith dimension. I think there are three immediate faith-based reasons. I believe our responsibility as people of faith is to exercise stewardship in relation to creation. God created, and God saw that it was good. But a bit like the prodigal son in the parable, we've squandered our inheritance, and now we must return to our Creator in a spirit of contrition and seek to put right our relationship with the Creator and with creation. And linked to that is our relationship with our global neighbours. Pope Francis, in his encyclical before the Paris COP in 2015, I thought summed it up very neatly when he said, everything is interconnected, and that genuine care for our own lives and our relationship with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to others. So here we have the needs of the global south coming up and interconnecting with the responsibility of the global north. The needs of those who have contributed little or nothing to the human action which has given rise to climate change, and those of us who over many generations have benefited from industrial development. And of course, in trying to address that responsibility of ours, of the wealthier nations, we are looking at in these negotiations at issues such as adaptation funds, of loss and damage fund, the moral obligation which will flow from our command to love our neighbour. The third element of a faith dimension, which I want to say more about later, is that through faith we can actually say that there is another way. To coin a phrase of a politician some years ago, there is or to reverse it, there is an alternative. The Multi-Faith Declaration, which was signed by faith leaders not just in Scotland but throughout the United Kingdom ahead of the Glasgow COP, advocates calls on us to be advocates for justice, and that we should do so, call upon governments, upon businesses, and others who exercise power and influence to give proper effect to the Paris Agreement and to make the transition to a just and green economy a priority. But interestingly, in the way the multi-faith agreement is set out, that comes third when we're asked as to what we should commit ourselves to. And it comes third after a commitment to respond to the challenge of climate change by ourselves reflecting deeply in prayer, in meditation and in worship, and to discern how to care for each other and for creation. And it also commits us to make transformational changes in our own lives and in the lives of our community through individual and collective action. And the multi-faith agreement was proclaimed in a prayer vigil in George Square, proclaimed in the public square here in Glasgow, a week past Sunday, with people, I think, of about 9 or 10 different faiths. Not only was the declaration read out, but actually there was then prayers led by on behalf of 9 faiths and beliefs. And the figure I have seen is that 82% of the world's population profess some allegiance to a faith. That's quite a significant power if we all come together and push that collective power that we have. I suspect it's the one which no politician would lightly ignore. I accept as you look to investment decisions, it's not easy. I don't pretend for a moment that this is easy. In any event, those responsible for managing funds, for trustees, financial advisors, have to do a balancing act as to what the different needs of their respective clients are. Do you want to have a steady income flow, a safe income flow, for example, if you're having to pay salaries? Or do you want to have investments which will lead to significant capital growth? These are perfectly day-by-day decisions that people have to make. But what we're also saying is that there's another layer. I would argue it's an important layer of complexity to have regard to ethical considerations. Over the years, that has been done in many cases in respect of investments in tobacco companies or armaments companies. And today the issue is around investment in companies which produce or make profit from fossil fuels. To invest, or to stay invested, or to disinvest. And I can see there's conflicting arguments and considerations there. Staying in, can you, by staying in, exercise influence from within? And if you get out, what happens to the shareholdings that you've surrendered? Might they be bought up by a sovereign wealth fund or other investors who don't have the same ethical scruples as you have just given up these? Has the overall cause therefore been advanced? In the Church of Scotland, this was an issue which was hotly debated at our General Assemblies in 2018 and 2019. The view of the Kirk's investment trustees favoured selective investment in companies which were assessed by expert agencies as having aligned their strategies with the tighter Paris Agreement. On the contrary, others argued that it was wrong to hold shares in any company which engaged in or profited from producing fossil fuels. The trustees' line was endorsed, albeit by a very narrow margin, in 2018 and then in 2019. And because of COVID, a very foreshortened General Assembly online in 2020 didn't actually address the matter. But earlier this year, 2021, the trustee investment managers deemed that on financial grounds that they decided that the 3 oil companies of which there were investments were no longer attractive, and therefore they sold their remaining interests. And so by the time we came to the General Assembly in May, there were no such fossil fuel investments. And the General Assembly welcomed that fact, and that any future investment of that nature could only be done following agreement between the Church of Scotland's Investment Trust, Investors Trust, and the Kirk's Faith Impact Forum, that there was indeed good evidence that the strategy and implementation of any such company was aligned with stringent targets set by the Paris Agreement. Moreover, a special committee was established to work out what the best framework was for future investment decisions which involve the ethics of investment practice. And that will report to the General Assembly in 2023, growing much wider than just carbon-related industries. But the Church also agreed that it would try to have the ambition of using the Net Zero 2030 framework to develop our plans and to work towards that. I don't think we should be under any illusion how challenging that is. Some of you who frequent Kirk buildings will know that they're not the most energy efficient in the world. Someone told me the other day that we actually own more listed buildings in Scotland than Historic Environment Scotland. So there's a real challenge there. But the challenge is also opportunities, because of the things that have to be done in terms of promoting energy efficiency, in terms of what kind of things can be done, which can create employment, because of course it is important. And in Scotland we know this, because for so many years, parts of the country have benefited from people who have been employed in the oil and gas industry, and it is important that there is a fair transition from those who have been employed in fossil fuel-based industries. So there are investment opportunities in renewables, in energy efficiency, in trying to look to the future as to, I mean, we know the aviation industry knows that it cannot continue as it's doing at the moment, and it must actually adapt and transform itself. And there are surely investment opportunities there in R&D as they do so. I recall that when the grants were first introduced for solar panels, they were at such a level to try and get to stimulate the market, so much so that they had to reduce the grants because everyone was then investing in it, and the cost of solar energy fell, likewise with the production of wind, both onshore and offshore. But I think there's something more fundamental where the role of faith is important. As I said, there must be another way, an alternative to a structure, an economic structure, which depends on ever-growing consumer demands and consumption. If we are to create a kind of society in which we can become carbon neutral, in which we sustain ourselves as carbon neutral, then that has implications for lifestyles and, above all, for values. If there are costs to be borne, then there is a need for education as to why that is the case. There is a need to connect, to be able to bring home to people what the reality is for those who are suffering already the impacts of climate change. And here I think the values of faith are very important. The parable of the sheep and goats is probably familiar to most, if not all of us here. And I always think at the end, when the people say to Jesus, when did we see you sick, or when did we see you hungry, when did we see you needing shelter, or when did we see you in prison? What is said to them is not that the things they did was for Jesus or because of Jesus. It's said that because you did it to Jesus. And that's quite a profound statement, because the converse is also true, that when you fail to do it, you failed to do it to Jesus. The dispossessed, the people who have been devastated through flood, the people who are hungry because of famine brought about by extreme weather conditions, the people who thirst because of drought, each and every one of them bears the face of Jesus. And if we don't do it, if we don't take the action, then we don't do it, and Jesus suffers because of our failure. And if we're going to make it more feasible and more attractive to change investment patterns, then I think we need to change the public climate on climate change, in the same way as we probably did and possibly did on tobacco. When I first became a Member of Parliament in 1983 and had to travel regularly between the Northern Isles and London, it was the back 4 seats, certainly in the small planes from Orkney to Edinburgh, which were non-smoking. By the time I left the Scottish Parliament 24 years later, we had implemented a ban on smoking in public places. We can actually change. Change the climate. And I also believe there's a limit to political action. Martin Luther King said that morality can't be legislated for, but behaviour can be regulated. Judicial decrees, he said, may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. And of course, behaviour can be regulated through laws, through rules, for example, on proper and more transparent accounting, so that assessment of companies' strategies and their behaviours can be more readily assessed. And in the Anglican Communion's Climate Resilience and Just Financing, there is a quote from a gentleman, Gus Speth, who's a former chair of the UN Development Group and founder as president of the World Resources Institute. And he says, and I quote, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems, but I was wrong." He's going on to say the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And he went on to conclude, he said, "And we scientists don't know how to do that." And may I dare say that neither do financial gurus, fund managers, or bankers. But faith communities may well be able to do that, do something about it. From a faith perspective, there is another way. There is the education in reality. There is the recognition, too, that we must engage and take on board properly, with proper consultation, those who are most vulnerable and those who are most affected. I was involved in the Poverty Truth Commission in Scotland about 11 years ago, where what we said there in terms of poverty was that nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that's absolutely something we should bear in mind too when thinking about how we deal with this issue with Indigenous people and with communities on the front line, that they must be engaged. And as faith communities, and particularly my own faith community, is that love is the thing that can make a difference. Love for God, love for creation, love for our neighbours. That's what can change hearts, because love, I believe, in the public square is justice, and in this case, climate justice. Love and a clear commitment to help the poor is at the core of the Christian message. The values are not exclusively to Christianity, but the values set out in the Edinburgh Finance Declaration of stewardship, love of neighbour, human flourishing, sustainability and purposefulness, justice and equity, common good. These are all the values which are essential if we're going to sustain lifestyles which will allow us to move towards and then sustain a carbon neutral economy. And we need to work alongside others who share these values to bring about individual and collective transformation of our lifestyles and the values on which our lifestyles are based. That may be the best route to ensuring that we can achieve a faith-based finance which will help make necessary advances towards a net zero economy. I very much doubt whether, when he set up that small savings bank in Rothwell in 1810, Henry Duncan foresaw the impact that his actions would have. But from a small beginning, rooted in faith and with a commitment to the poor, he showed that that can have a transformational effect. Thank you very much.